there has been a group of employees that have been hired right out of university, right into a remote work environment. And they have spent a year or two, and in some cases, 3 years working completely remote. And a recent study that I read just earlier this week showed that there is a skills gap between those people who have only ever worked remote compared to their predecessors who spent the first 3 years out of university working in an in-office environment. For all the things that we've talked about, the serendipitous conversations, the networking, the mentorship that they get, that you don't have the opportunity to get when you are behind a screen and have very limited focused online conversations, as opposed to kind of the general interactions and mentorship that happens naturally when you're in an office. Have you noticed that in the organizations that you work with? And if so, how do we overcome that to help this next generation get the training that they need to help the organization succeed?
Well, I would say that if you have hair the color of salmon eyes, which means that you've been around a while, which means that pre-pandemic, you knew what it was like to work in an office. Part of what you're saying, Sam, is these are people like, they don't know the before times. Like they don't have any context of what working in the office was. And so I think we're, number one, wise to realize that that may be a gap. But the other thing is, if you're my age, you're not probably the best person to help figure that out, because you did it that way so long that there's a whole bunch of stuff that you just know, it's like profound knowledge. And so I think that's where you want to engage, back to your point, those folks that worked in the office 2-3 years before this, rather than those of us that have worked in the office 20 years before that. And so engage them more in, like, what is it that you are glad you had before we went away, right, that we need to give to others now? And so part of it's skills, Sam, to your point, but part of it is also, now back to us as leaders, is setting clear expectations. So we typically think about expectations as being the deliverables of the work, the what's of the work, right? The timelines and the deliverables and the quality and the quantity and all that stuff. And that's clearly important. And too many leaders, remote or otherwise, aren't very good at doing that anyway. But there's two other kinds of expectations that we need to really work on. And that's the why of the work and the how of the work. And it's the how of the work expectations that are the kind of things that play a role, a lot of what you and I have been talking about for this whole conversation, but also those skills or those practices that those newer employees need now, that they're going to be in the office 2 or 3 days a week because they've just never been there. It's not their fault. There's nothing wrong. It just means that they don't have that context. So we have to help them get that context, and we have to be clear about what our expectations are for them when they're in.
Yeah, agreed. Kevin, this is fascinating for me, and it's been very informative. It's reinforced some of the thoughts that I had, but it also reminds me, to your most recent point, that more and more I'm realizing that I am that, me and my business partner Don, who also has a lot of hair the same color that we do, that we're the two old white guys up in the Muppet, the Muppet Show, the two old white guys in the balcony. Those of us, again, old enough to know, remember that reference, just criticizing.
Google it, everybody. If you don't know what Sam's talking about, just Google the Muppets. Old men in the Muppets.
Old white men in the Muppets. And that is unfortunately what we see, because it was a reality for us for so long that it was just commonly understood practice and best practice, and there was no challenging it. And sometimes I do feel, and I know this is something that I acknowledge in myself, I sometimes forget that I am not, despite all of my experience and despite the success that my business partner and I have had in building companies, what was successful then may not necessarily be successful today. And that's a hard pill to swallow and a hard habit to break when you're managing an organization.
The world of work and the way society views work has changed drastically in 3 years. And to what I said earlier, it doesn't mean that we have to throw out everything we know about leading, because an awful lot hasn't changed, right? Mm-hmm. Human behavior hasn't really changed. Group dynamics haven't really changed. but the context has changed drastically and at light speed. And for us to think that we can lead the way we always did in that situation is we would be sadly mistaken if we think that's what we can do. So we have to be thinking ahead. We have to be asking. We have to be learning. We have to be engaging with our teams. We need to be doing with our teams all the things that we want them to do with us. And if we do those things, we'll head in the right direction.
Yeah, excellent. And I think that's a great way to end this conversation, at least as part of it. A lot of education that's required by managers, and a lot of education still required by employees, and knowing maybe what they don't know and being open to what they don't know, as well as managers. And all this means is that we need to have another 20 of these conversations to kind of dig down. So I hope that I can count on you to
have me back. I'm ready to come back anytime, Sam.
Yeah, it's a great conversation. I think there's so many other things that we need to explore, and a little bit more about your book. Why don't you hold them up again? I'd like everybody to kind of get a sense of what they should be going and reading if they want more of these insights from you.
The Long Distance Leader, The Long Distance Teammate, and the most recently, The Long Distance Team. And you can
incredibly prophetic.
And you can find all of them at
prophet.
kevineikenberry.com/books.
All right. That makes it easy for everybody. I encourage you to go and do it, and stay tuned to 17th Floor. We'll definitely have Kevin back. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everybody watching.